Ask an Egyptologist. Yeah, what's going on, part of people in the place to be? I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Glad everybody could be here. And it's Thursday. We're in the throes of an election, and we're picking between Godzilla or Dracula. And yeah. It's very interesting. I'll leave it at that. But I have a returning guest with me. We have Egyptologist and believer in the Lord Jesus. Amen. We got Mr. Dr. David Falk in the building. What's going on, Dave?
It's going on fantastic.
Cool. So yeah, I know you won't speak on what's going on in the States, you being, Canadian
Nope.
and everything. So I'll keep you out of trouble.
But
But
you did the last time, huh?
hey, man, I try. But the reason why we are here today is actually David's fault. To be quite honest with you, because David,
My fault.
It's your fault, sir. Because I inbox him just to say hi. It was actually a social text. It was just, hey, how you doing? It's been a minute since we
Yeah,
talked.
sure it was.
It was, Dave. It was. And, he's like, hey, so is this social or you want something? It's like, well, it's social, but, I am thinking about having you come over the channel before the year's over. And he was like, listen, the Q&A was too short the last time I was there, so I would love to answer some questions. So I'm like, you know what? You ask, and I will deliver. So tonight, it is 100% Q&A with David Falk. It is David versus the internet. All right? This is what we're doing tonight. So whatever questions you have about the amazing, mysterious land of ancient Kemet, he is here to hopefully answer your inquiries. So, but before we get into that, Egyptologist, right? Fancy smancy term. What exactly is an Egyptologist, David?
An Egyptologist, put at its most simply, is somebody who studies professionally ancient Egypt. That's it in a nutshell. Now, becoming an Egyptologist is a lot more complicated than that.
So,
But as
what's
far
the
as
road? What's the road? What's the road to being an Egyptologist? What does it look like?
It usually looks like 10 years of post-secondary schooling. That's what it usually looks like. You usually have to do your bachelor's degree in Egyptology, followed by a master's degree and then a PhD.
Wow, that's a lot of tuition. So
It's a lot of tuition, yes.
So can you read the Medu Neter? Can you read the actual hieroglyphics?
The Medu Neter.
Netcher.
Netcher.
Well, you see, obviously I'm related. The Medu Netcher, yes.
That term actually doesn't always mean hieroglyphs. Okay, that's a term that's actually changed over time.
Right, the Demotic script and other scripts. Right?
Actually, Medu Neter means words of the gods.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you take that term, say during the basically from its earliest times to the Third Intermediate period, that just means like hymns. Hymns, holy words that were spoken by a lector priest. Okay, it's only after Alexander the Great conquers Egypt, and you get the Ptolemies.
Right.
The Greek rulers of Egypt, and you got that racial tension between Greek and native Egyptian, that the words Medu Neter start to mean hieroglyphs. Okay. Now, to answer your question, yes, I can read hieroglyphs.
Wow. Because there is a segment within what's called the conscious community that will say that the Medu Neter has not been deciphered.
Nonsense.
Okay. Just checking.
It's been known since the middle 19th century. It
Now,
was
is it true that it was Champollion, or was there people prior to him that were making headway into deciphering the script?
there was a British man that was making some headway, but he was on the wrong track. He would have never gotten there. Champollion really made the decisive discovery, which was by recognizing that cartouches contained names. And he was able to compare the cartouches of Cleopatra and Ptolemy to the Greek texts.
So how important was the Rosetta Stone then? Was it like
Absolutely critical. It couldn't have been done without the Rosetta Stone.
So it was a dead language prior to that. It was a dead
Oh,
script.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a dead script prior to that. And it had 3 languages on it. It had hieratic, it had hieroglyphic, and it had Greek. And we knew the Greek at the time. So knowing the Greek, we could then start translating the other 2.
Right. Now, of course, the script is different than language. A lot of people confuse the two.
Yes.
Is there any like phonetic markings within the script that might help us to actually somewhat speak the script and like salvage some of the language?
Oh, well, actually, the language is still alive in some respect. The language still exists as Coptic. Okay?
Right.
And what Coptic is roughly 90% Egyptian language, 10% Greek. Okay? So a lot of what Champollion did was he actually looked at the script and compared it to Coptic, because Coptic was also a known language at the time.
Right. So is Coptic considered a Semitic language?
Coptic is Egyptian.
So it's Semitic. Okay.
It is a language of Kemet.
So when
It's the final stage of the Egyptian language.
okay. So
The language goes through several periods. It goes through Old Egyptian, a Middle Egyptian, which is a classical period,
Right.
Late Egyptian, and then it goes into a Ptolemaic period, and then a Coptic period.
Right. Now, most languages, you have the proper way of speaking, right? The Queen's English, so to speak. Then you have the Ebonics, right? What was the Ebonics for the regular blue collar Kemetic person? Like, was there
There is a period where we have, say, a more Elizabethan Kemet language and a more street language. And that would be the transition between, say, Middle Egyptian and Late Egyptian. We have one very interesting text where the king is speaking in this elegant, high Middle Egyptian, and all his courtiers are speaking in this sort of guttural street Late Egyptian.
Wow. So, a critique that people have when they attack ancient Kemet, that was there a rampant homosexuality? Was it considered a vice? Was it considered perfectly okay? Were people against it? Like, what was ancient Kemet's view of same-sex attraction?
It happened. It existed, but it was looked down upon. You see it in, say, the negative confession.
Right.
It's part of the negative confession. I have not committed homosexuality, among with the other negative confessions. So it was considered to be a practice that was abnormal. But it also did occur. We do have some pretty strong evidence to say that it did happen, and it happened at some pretty high levels.
Right. So speaking of that, there's several funeral texts, right? You got the pyramid text, coffin text. You got well, please correct me. I'm going to try to say it. Put up Heru. Is that how you say it? The Book of the Dead.
Book of the Dead.
The coming forth by
It's the
day?
Book of Two Ways. It's
Book of Two
formally
Ways.
known as the Book of Two Ways.
And how would you say it in the language? It's not Pirab Emhuru? I thought it was that.
I'd have to look up what that was.
Okay.
Would you exactly your
Well, I'm trying. It's supposedly that's supposed to be the coming forth by day.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay.
It could be. I don't know for sure. And
Okay.
I'd have to look that up.
So
I've never looked up the title, to be honest.
Okay.
I
Wow.
just read it.
Wow. Okay. True. So there are those within the quote unquote conscious community. They try to sanitize any kind of divinity from the culture of ancient Kemet. And when people, right, but people will bring up these funeral texts. It's like, well, obviously they must have believed in an afterlife because we have these funeral texts. And the response is, well, you just don't understand. This is all metaphoric. This is all high science, quantum physics. I've heard, So, is there anything to that claim that there is some ancient science embedded within these funeral texts?
No.
He's like, nope, that's it.
They are those funeral texts are quite literally magic spells.
Right.
They're quite literally magic spells. And they're not only just magic spells, they're vicarious magic spells. Okay? Most of those texts have the enchanter placing the dead in a vicarious relationship with Osiris.
Right.
Okay? So what's happened, say, like we even find, even in the funerary texts of, say, queens, this is true. So there's not even a gender difference here. It's very much a vicarious experience.
Right. In order to make
the dead
it to...
are pieced together because they become one with Osiris.
They have to transform into him for a moment, right? And then
they pick up his power, which is the power of resurrection,
right,
by identifying with him.
Which is
now
interesting,
there is some Egyptian metaphysics going on here,
right? But it's definitely on the spiritual realm. There's no
it's metaphysics, not
there's
physics.
no binary code happening here.
No,
right?
no binary code.
Right.
We're talking religion and metaphysics.
Right. So even the women, who are lucky enough to have, this book of spells, the afterlife, even they would have to become this male deity in order to make
yes.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Interesting. Because another claim that the conscious community makes is that, it was woman that was God. Now, of course, you had goddesses.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't have the ability to bring you into the afterlife. It was only the male deities, right?
No, that's not quite true. There are women deities involved in the afterlife and in the transformation of the dead. Okay? The transformation of the dead in the Egyptian worldview is one of apotheosis. You become like God.
Right.
And by identifying with a god, the god gives you power to become godlike. Your body becomes transformed into a godlike entity, and then you are, at that point, immune from the powers of decay and decomposition.
Okay. So, and listen, guys,
that's why the vicarious thing is so important.
Right.
Is because you don't have that power on your own. You got to get it from someone else.
Right. So you got to live through the power of that particular deity in order to.
Yeah. There's a time when somebody is buried and mummified. There's a period of actual that the decay continues in the corpse. And it's believed by the Egyptians that it was during this period that the corpse was vulnerable to attack by demons and Seth, and in order to stave off that death and decay, that process of apotheosis takes place. That's why they covered all these mummies in gold. That's the reason. Because in the Egyptian worldview, the flesh of the gods was gold, and their bones were iron, and these were seen as substances that were immune to decay. You look at the shipwrecked sailor, and you see that the the serpent god, this big massive serpent god, has skin and flesh of gold and eyes of lapis.
Right. Lapis lazuli. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Everyone in the chat, listen. It's not just me asking questions. I mean, I'm just buying time for you guys to start asking your questions. He is here. He's taking on everybody. It's David versus the internet. So whatever questions
Antipas.
whatever you guys have, let me see, what else do people ask? Usually. Okay. Is there any another critique that people might say is that there are many things in the Bible that are stolen from ancient Egypt, like for instance the Trinity, and people will bring up Aset, I think, was it Aset, Asor, and I forgot the other one, and they will say that that's the original Trinity. Is there any truth to the claim that we ripped off the Trinity concept from Kemetic religion?
No. And the reason I say no is because the Trinity is a very different idea than what the Egyptians would call a triumvirate. A triumvirate is three gods, separate identities that are just united in purpose. Okay?
Can you give us an example of that in Kemetic?
Oh, sure. There's lots of triumvirates in ancient Egypt. Amun-Re, Mut, and Khonsu are a triumvirate. Okay?
Wow.
These are the great three Theban gods. Now, what you're talking about with the Trinity is one god and three persons.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
There's nothing like that in ancient Egypt. Probably the closest you would possibly get is the manifestations of deity that you find, say, Amun-Re manifesting. But then that's more like modalism,
Right.
where one god is expressing himself in many modes.
Right. Right. Okay. Cool. What else? So, and I've asked you this before. I might as well ask you again. So, the Exodus, in your
The
opinion,
Exodus, my favorite subject in the whole world, after pyramids.
absolutely, absolutely. Actually, you know what? Since you said that, so
Oh no, not pyramids.
yeah, we gotta do. You say you like pyramids. We're gonna talk about pyramids. So
I was being facetious.
oh, it's too late now, buddy.
Okay.
You're here. So, did the Israelites build the pyramids?
No. The pyramids came long before the Israelites.
Right.
Okay. There's very little overlap even with the Joseph's family coming to Egypt and the building of the pyramids. Very little overlap. Joseph entered into Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period. This is where long after almost all the pyramids were built. In fact, there's only one other pyramid that's built after that. And that was the pyramid of King Ahmose I, and that's a really small one.
Oh,
that one is about 40 meters.
Oh, okay, and that's after the fact.
That's
the most youngest. That's the youngest.
That's the last pyramid that's built in Egypt. You do get pyramids that are built in Nubia after.
Right.
During Dynasty 25, they'll build some small ones up in Nubia. In fact, most of the pyramids in the world are built there. But they're all really small.
Right. We got a question here from Dinu. What is the timeline of Kemet, the religion? Does it have a clear-cut origin or beginning?
Yes, it does. The origins of the Kemet religion are essentially tribal animistic deities that begin during the pre-dynastic period. So before Dynasty 1. So you're talking Dynasty 0, which is Nakata 3, possibly even further back than then. So might even go back as far as Nakata 1.
Right.
So we find standards and little tokens, totems of deities going way, way back.
So even from the very beginning, was there a pantheism, or was there a something similar to what we now call monotheism in pre-dynastic Egypt.
It was a polytheism. It was animism. It was polytheism. Pantheism didn't actually occur in Egypt until Akhenaten. Akhenaten actually introduced pantheism to Egypt.
Pantheism. Okay. Wow.
Okay. Pantheism, all is God.
Right. Right.
Okay. Polytheism, many gods.
Right. They didn't
Animism,
seem to take to that too
gods.
tough. They were his people weren't too happy about that. It seems.
They were not too happy about his mismanagement. But the case is also overblown too. We have to remember that there was this myth that was sort of circulated during the late 19th century that Akhenaten was overthrown by his own people, or that rioting broke out on his death. There's no evidence of that. We have absolutely no evidence that the transition of power at Amarna was anything but peaceful. I mean, this is a military dictatorship.
Right.
Okay.
Right. He got the army, so
he's got the army.
Right.
The royal family still controlled the army.
But they did dismantle his temples. Once he died, they pretty much everybody reverted back, right?
We have to also remember that after Akhenaten died, that there was other kings at Amarna. Smenkhare reigned after him.
Like right
And
after
then,
or alongside?
After.
After.
At least from what we can tell, at least 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't a long reign, but it was 1 or 2 years.
So after Akhenaten, there was no more worship of Atum, or was
Oh yeah,
there?
Aten was still worshipped under Smenkhare.
Oh, okay.
And it was worshipped into the first 3 years of King Tutankhamun.
So then after that,
And that was
did it
all
just
done at
phase
Amarna.
out, or people just or did the new pharaoh bring back the older guys?
Yeah,
Like what?
King Tut brought back the old religion after 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And then he reigned for his remaining 7 years at Thebes.
Wow. Okay. Here's a question from Carly. When did the Nubians reign as pharaohs?
Dynasty 25. So in the third intermediate period, the Nubians reigned as pharaohs. And they're actually a really interesting dynasty because one of their criticisms of the ancient Egyptians was they weren't Egyptian enough.
Wow.
So they took the symbols of ancient Egypt and doubled down on them all. So you'll see on, say, busts of 25th dynasty pharaohs, they're not wearing just one Uraeus, they're wearing 2.
Okay.
To show how powerful and true blue Egyptian they are.
And what was some of the Nubian pharaohs? Who were they?
Taharqa was a Nubian pharaoh. There was several. I don't. It's not really my area. I tend to focus more on what happened before then. The third intermediate period, things get a bit fuzzy, but Taharqa was one of them.
I like Taharqa because when people say, "Oh, you can't prove none of the characters in the Old Testament ever existed," and I say, "Well, what about Taharqa?" Because if they say Taharqa didn't exist, because these are pro-Kemet people, so it's like, well, what about Taharqa? So they got to give me Taharqa now. They have no choice, so.
Shoshank, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, Shoshank as well.
Now, Shoshank, is that the same as oh my God.
Shishak.
Right. Is that the same
It's
person?
biblical Shishak, same pay. Shoshank the first.
Right.
Yeah, same person.
Okay. Cool. Yes, Carly. He was in the Bible. There's a few pharaoh called by name in the Old Testament. Oh, so here's a question. I have my own idea. I'll run it by you. But why was the pharaoh of the Exodus never mentioned by name?
Didn't have to. He actually is mentioned by name, but because he named the city.
Ramses.
Yeah. One of the things is that the Pharaoh, in some respects, the coverage is so big in the Book of Exodus of the pharaohs that in some ways it's a literary amalgamation of many pharaohs. Okay, like for example, when people ask me who was the pharaoh of the oppression, okay, now you're talking dozen pharaohs. Okay, and many of them played a part in the oppression.
Right.
Like, for example, we know from records which pharaoh did the enslavement of the Israelites because there's a general called Akhmosa, son of Abana, who basically chronicled the conquest of Avaris and the enslavement of all the people there.
And which pharaoh was that?
That was under the pharaoh Akhmosa, King Akhmosa. So first king of Dynasty 18.
Now,
But
would
the
that be
Exodus itself doesn't take place until the beginning of Dynasty 19.
Okay. And how long was that? I mean, between those two dynasties?
That was a few hundred years.
Okay. Wow. Oh, here's another question here by D. New. Is ancient Kemet, again, the religion, identical to Kemet religion that we hear of in North American urban settings today? That's kind of what I've been alluding to with the conscious community.
Okay.
So I don't know how familiar you are
I'm not
with
that
these guys.
familiar with the conscious community. I have some familiarity with other forms of Egyptian revivalism in North America, like Kemetic Orthodoxy.
Okay.
And the two are very different. The two are very, very different. It's a little bit like neo-paganism today.
Okay.
Neo-paganism has almost nothing to do with the original paganism practiced by the Druids. It's a revival religion. It's a religion that's been revived and reinterpreted to meet modern tastes and standards.
Is it similar to cosplaying?
I won't go that far. I won't go that far. But you do see where religious ideas are basically pulled in and out of the broader pool of philosophy and ideas.
Right.
And revival religions are very much like that. They tend to feed on what our impression is of those original religions, not necessarily what's the historical accuracy of those religions.
Right. So if let's say we decided together that we're going to try to actually revive some
Gonna make a cult?
form. Huh?
We're making a cult?
Hey, why not? Got nothing else to do in this pandemic. It's very profitable, right? So if we wanted to somehow revive some form of ancient Kemetic religion, right? We actually said, you know what? We're really going to try to imitate and mimic these people's belief system. What text? Do we have enough text and information to do that?
Not really.
I mean, outside
We
of the
have
funeral text.
some. Okay,
Right.
we don't actually have, say, the secret texts. That we don't have. We got some, but we don't have most of them. Okay? Those were texts that were held by the lector priests. They were kept on papyrus, and most of those papyri were destroyed.
Right.
Okay?
So we're spitballing.
We're just spitballing at that point. Now, we got some idea. I mean, people like me who research Egyptian ritual and religion, we can piece together some of this, and much of my studies of the Ark of the Covenant come out of that setting where I'm actually doing that research. But precious little is agreed upon there.
Wow.
Like, for example, one of the things is we see all these reliefs of rituals being done in the temples. We have no idea what order they were done in. Absolutely no idea. Because those reliefs weren't done in any particular order.
Basically, you had to be there.
Nothing we can agree and recognize. There's no instruction manual on the walls of the temple saying do this one first, then this one, then this one, then this one. No, there's nothing like that.
But what about the veneration of the Nasut Bidi, of the pharaoh? Is there any material when it comes to that we can use?
There is, we know that, say, the Nesubiti, the veneration of the Nesubiti, especially the funerary temples, involved offerings and sacrifices and that sort of thing. But that was ubiquitous across temples anyway. But reconstructing that and the order of it and the specific chants that go along with it is a whole nother matter.
So if I or anyone in the chat wanted to be a Kemetic high priest, which, by the way, there are people who make this claim that they actually consider themselves Kemetic clergy.
There's people who claim to be the Queen of England.
That's you see, be nice.
You can claim anything.
Be nice, Dave. So, but there are people, and I know of people, nice people, smart people, who do consider themselves a practitioner of Kemetic religion and call themselves a Kemetic high priest. They have a shrine, right? So if I wanted to be a Kemetic priest,
do they have a bark?
No, well, I've been to his house. I've never
Does he have a sacred bark?
He has.
Does he have an naos?
He has a lot of.
Does he have a naos at the back?
The what?
Because that's part of what you need. You need a bark.
And that's the boat thing, right?
That's the boat thing.
Oh, okay. So you need the boat to be a caprice. You need a boat. Why?
You to do a proper Egyptian temple with proper Egyptian service. You need sacred space. That's not a negotiable for Egyptian religion.
And how does the bark create sacred space? How does that work? How does that work?
A sacred space is a combination of space that's segregated from profane space. So you can't have it in your kitchen. You have to have a separate space dedicated to your god, whichever god it is, and it has to have a plinth with because you can't just put your bark.
What's a plinth? We have no idea what
a plinth. It's a stand.
Oh, okay.
It's a stand. It's usually made of stone.
Okay.
Possibly you could do it out of wood. I can't see why you couldn't do it out of wood, but it's usually out of stone. Big stone stand that you rest your bark or shrine on it. Now you need that wooden shrine of some kind to provide an extra layer of sacredness.
Is that the tabir?
Within your sacred space.
Is that the I think it's called a tabir? Is it called tabir? It's a box where you put your
No. The taba you mean. You mean the taba. No, tabas are something else. Okay. In Egyptian there's something else. There's just a box. That's just a box.
So the boat, people are asking
shrine.
How does the boat create the sacred space?
Okay. The boat creates sacred space because it's an elaborate shrine. Okay. So it's essentially a upright box shrine that's on the hull of a boat.
It's like in the middle, right? Like I've seen the okay.
Yeah, the shrine itself is in the middle. Now, on that shrine is a lot of sacred symbolism. You have two sets of symbols that you need. You need the uraeus along the top to keep profanity out.
Okay, now what's the uraeus?
That's the uraeus. That's the vultures.
Okay.
Not vultures, sorry, cobras. The little cobra deities. You see them in rows. Those have to be along the top of the shrine. Okay, that's your first layer of sacred protection. Second layer is you need a vulture that stretches its wings around the shrine. The wings keep the space between the wings holy. So you have two gods doing two separate jobs. One keeping bad stuff out, one keeping good stuff in. Okay? Inside of that box, you have a little throne. Maybe not literally a throne, but something throne-like, a symbol or something.
Right.
With two other goddesses with wings stretched out.
And we would be familiar with that. And you put
your god inside between those two, for lack of a better word, cherubim, winged goddesses.
Right. And we would be familiar with that because that would be similar to the Ark of the Covenant.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. So the Ark creates sacred space.
The ark creates sacred space. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So if I'm going to be a Kemetic
And that's
priest,
what you need. That's what you need just for the shrine.
right? Without that, I don't have sacred space.
You don't have sacred space. No. But that has to be housed in its own sacred space.
All right. So now it's
which
Inception.
is usually
now we're talking Inception. It's like right.
It's like a Russian Matryoshka doll.
Right.
You open it up, and then you open it up,
right,
and you open it up. It's sacred space within sacred space within sacred space.
Wow.
That's what you need if you want to be an Egyptian high priest with an acceptable form of worship according to the ancient Egyptians.
Wow. So I need a boat. Okay.
You need a boat, and then you need a shrine to cover the boat.
Wow.
And then you need to put that in its own sort of back sacred inner portion of the temple.
Right. Doesn't matter what size the boat is.
Actually,
can I cheat and have a mini boat? And just put it in my house.
Actually, you can. Okay. You can have, as long as it's large. They came in all variety of sizes.
Oh.
They came from sizes that would have been, say, maybe 2-3 feet, to sizes that were very, very large. So they came in a range of sizes. And for temples that were actually too small to accommodate a sacred park, because there were actually the temples too small for this.
Wow.
In those events, they could just use, say, a car shrine, one that didn't require carrying poles. The big deal was actually the big deal with size is actually accommodating the carrying poles.
Right.
Because the carrying poles were typically attached to the bark.
Was it permanently attached, or did it have to?
Usually permanently attached, yes. Okay. In the case of barks, yes.
Now, which guy had the biggest boat?
That would have to be Amun-Re at Thebes.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a boat that I believe it had 13 poles.
Wow.
13 carrying poles. 30 people carried it.
Sheesh.
It was a big deal. It was a big.
Were these boats functional, or they were just cosmetic?
They were cosmetic. They were essentially model boats.
Okay. Wow.
Shrines in the shape of a boat. And of course, the more people that carried your boat, the more important your god was.
And why did gods need boats to begin with?
Because Egypt was a river culture. And kings and important people, they traveled by boat. The boat was really central to Egyptian culture. The river was central. It provided food, it provided transportation, it provided water, it provided agriculture. Everything the Egyptians needed to live came from the river.
So that would be like somebody having a Mercedes-Benz and carrying their god in the Benz because it's a luxury item.
It's a luxury item. And the bigger, more luxurious the boat, the more important the person.
Interesting.
In fact, when they did these processions, where they crossed the river, what they would do is take that sacred bark and put it on a barge that was elaborately decorated in almost a similar style as the sacred bark itself.
Right, because we have to show off.
Exactly.
Right.
But you don't want a poor god, do you? what use is that?
Right. All right. So
if the god can't make ends meet, he's not going to be able to help you with your crops.
Worshiping, right.
Yeah.
No, that actually makes sense. Absolutely.
I mean, this even shows up in the Bible where Jehovah is said to be the god that owns all the sheep and all the cattle on the hills. If he's a poor god, he can't help you.
This is true. If so, can a Kemetic priest be married?
Yes.
And
absolutely.
would your spouse help you in the upkeep of the shrine, or she had a different job?
She usually had a different job. And that went both ways, by the way. Priestesses as well. Okay, priestesses could be married, and who she married could have a completely different job.
Wow.
We have records of priestesses of Hathor who were married to usually important scribes. And they had to serve different functions and they did different jobs. But that's because women in ancient Egypt could work.
Okay.
They could work, hold jobs, earn money, own slaves, adopt children on their own initiative. They didn't need, women in ancient Egypt did not need permission to adopt a child from her husband. She could just go and do it.
And the husband would have to be fine with that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But then again, too, if he wasn't fine with it, he could just divorce at the drop of a hat. And we see in ancient Egypt both men and women in revolving marriages.
Okay. What was there a prison system in ancient Kemet?
Sort of.
Okay.
It really depended on what the offense was. Now, we have to understand that the legal system in ancient Egypt was very it wasn't defined. It was not, there was two levels of offense, okay? There's your typical petty crimes, and those often were not punished. You have records from, say, Deir el-Medina, where somebody would borrow someone's donkey and never return it, or it died while it was in the guy's care. And the original owner trying to collect on that debt and just having to go round and round and round and round in circles, getting judgment after judgment that he could never collect on.
Wow.
Okay, so you had those situations. The other level of crime was crimes against the king. And those were almost all death penalty, no matter what they were.
Now, define crime against the king.
You steal a bronze toothpick from the king, and you lose your head. It's essentially that sort of thing.
Okay.
Okay, so even the most minor crime that was seen as a crime against the king was a capital offense.
Okay.
Now, crimes that say disrupted the community to a large extent, and it had to be something really outrageous and really egregious, had other forms of punishment. There was a prison system in the form of quarries. Like, for example, the prison Joseph is sent to. Mm-hmm. That was probably a quarry. Didn't have walls, but there was nowhere to go. You would essentially go to this quarry and you'd work until the king decided what to do with you.
Wow. Or forget about you.
Or forget about you. Yes, that happened too.
Wow. Okay. Incest. Right?
I'm sorry, what?
Incest. The
Incest,
interbreeding.
okay.
So
Yes.
Was that a legit thing? Did the royal family marry each other to preserve the line? Is that true?
In very rare circumstances. Now, incest is one of those things that's very much misunderstood about Egyptian culture.
Okay.
Okay. It was a term of endearment to call your wife your sister. That was a term of endearment, and it happened all the time, regardless of what her actual blood relationship was. This makes things very difficult for us today to try to sort of unravel. Cherney did a study on the amount of actual incest done in ancient Egypt, and he said out of the 400 cases he studied, only 2 were actual incest.
Wow.
A consanguous relationship. And it was what he considered a consanguous relationship was the marriage of, say, cousins.
So it was never siblings.
It was very rarely siblings. Now, there was one very notable exception to this, and that's in the case of certain royalty at the time of a succession crisis. Like, for example, King Tut married his sister, half-sister. And the reason was because there's this belief that if you marry 2 royalty with the power of the royal blood, the the power of the royal blood would feed on itself magically, and that would strengthen the royal bloodline, produce strong children, etc. Of course, it had the opposite effect.
Right. Yeah. Coronado F wants to know, was Tutankhamun born of
I think he means
incest only?
Tutankhamun.
Tutankhamun. So
Yeah, King Tut.
So was he born out of incest?
We're not sure. Probably not. It was probably not.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about science. Actually, you know what? Before science, what civilization came first? Was it Sumer or Kemet? Or is it too close to call?
That's a tough one because you have to define what civilization is.
All right. Let's say civilization.
Civilization is
politics, writing systems, families, school systems. You know, something what we have today, I guess.
Okay, writing systems, they're pretty much come at around the same time, within 100 years of each other. Okay. Now, Sumer is older in some respects because it has a longer material culture.
Because that's where we get the lapis lazuli from, right? From that area.
A lot of the lapis comes from Afghanistan.
Okay.
There's actually a huge trading network that goes way back in the ancient Near East. From essentially, the earliest times of, say, the first few dynasties of Egypt. We're seeing trade all the way over to India already. Okay. And by the New Kingdom, there's trade goods going into Europe from Egypt, believe it or not.
So science. So, what are some things
You realize I'm a humanities scholar, right?
Huh?
You realize I'm a humanities scholar, right?
I'm just saying, you're an Egyptologist, so you
yes,
know.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I just had to preface that.
So what are some things that maybe we use today that has its birth in Egypt when it comes to like science?
Okay, a lot of things were birthed in Egypt. Architecture was birthed in Egypt. Hydrology, probably the biggest advance that Egypt did was hydrology. They could take the river and divert it to create new fields, new agriculture. They created canals all across Egypt. They did mathematics. They did geometry. They birthed a lot of different disciplines.
Interesting.
And a lot of things that aren't so good too. They also invented some not so good things.
All right, let's hear that too. What are some of the bad things?
They invented pornography.
Really?
Yes, really.
Really? The conscious community never says that. they never bring that up. Huh? So they're the first ones to actually write naughty things on walls.
They write naughty things on papyrus. Yes, and distribute it.
Oh, so they had like
publishing. They did publishing too. Yeah.
So dirty stories. They would write dirty
pictures.
Stories.
Pictures.
All right. Oh, here's one. The contention of Horus and Set.
Yes.
Now, was that the fight, which of course has a lot of sexual, parts to it, was that put there as a way to shame the other person, or was there some kind of eroticism that was just weird?
No, it's about reproductivity. Okay, the contention of Horus and Seth was the papyrus we have for the contention. It's a late period text. But the legend itself goes way back, and what we're talking about here is that these two patron gods, Horus and Seth, were the gods of Upper and Lower Egypt. They were the patron gods of Upper and Lower Egypt.
Right.
Horus being the god of Upper Egypt, Seth being the god of Lower Egypt. Egypt was the land of two kingdoms. Okay, so the king of Egypt, is the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. Okay. This is a mythologizing of that conquest of Upper Egypt over Lower Egypt. Okay. So in the contending of Horus and Seth, you have Seth wounding Horus by removing his eye, and Horus removing Seth's testicles in retaliation. And the idea here is that now the land of Lower Egypt cannot reproduce. It's now subservient to Upper Egypt. Which is why in most cases the god of kingship is Horus. He's the god of kingship. When the pharaoh dies, the Horus bird leaves the old king and flies to the new king to put his blessing on the new king. Because he's the winner. Right. He's the winner. He's the victor. He has avenged his father Osiris and united the two lands.
So what about the, tricking, or maybe not tricking, one of the guys to eat cabbage that has, some emissions, should I say, on the lettuce?
I'm not familiar with that part of the story.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I won't comment on that.
All right.
But
so it was war propaganda.
That does go on in the story. Like, for example, Osiris is tricked to be to go into a box that Seth chops up and throws into various places across Egypt. Right.
And then his wife, well, not his wife, but his mom, has to come and pick up the pieces, right?
His wife and sister, yes.
Wife's sister, right.
Yeah.
Right, but he can't find his male member, and she has to go and...
Because it got eaten by the Oxyrhynchus fish.
Amazing. And then, so... This is a dumb question, but I'm going to just say it just so we can have it on record. So, does that have any semblance to the resurrection of Jesus?
No.
Okay. Of course not. But...
Well, here's the thing. Isis puts back the pieces of Osiris. But in putting back the pieces of his physical body, what she has done is two things. Okay? She's put together back his pieces in the afterlife. So now Osiris rules in the afterlife because Isis put the pieces together.
He never comes back to our realm.
No, but what happens is the body has enough magical energy that Isis can copulate with the wife, or with Osiris. So she copulates with the corpse of Osiris to produce the god Anubis.
And Anubis is the one that guides you in the Duat, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that doesn't sound like Christianity whatsoever.
I'm sorry, I got that wrong. She copulates with the
Horus to get Osiris
to produce Horus. To produce Horus. Sorry.
And Horus is the god of the underworld, or is it Osiris?
Horus is the god of kingship.
And Osiris is the goddess of the underworld. God of the underworld.
Osiris is the god of the underworld.
Right. And he's green.
He's green, yes. Or
now,
black.
Why that specific color? Do we know why? Or?
Yes, we absolutely know why. Because he's a corpse. This is a process that happens to a dead body called marbling. So when a body dies, within 48 hours, it starts to change color to a blackish green color.
So he's literally a dead god.
He's literally a corpse. Yeah.
He's a zombie deity.
Yeah, he's a zombie deity.
Wow. That's crazy. All right, people in the chat, if you got any more questions, please feel free, because we're just going crazy over here. Let's see here. War. Did every pharaoh have imperialistic tendencies, or were there some pharaohs that kind of just mind their business?
Some more than others. But war was actually a part of the economy Okay. Like every economy, Egypt had inflation. And if you're a country that's been around for 3,000 years, you have a lot of inflation. Well, this is the reason why the first pyramids were made of stone, but later pyramids were made of mud brick. And that's because it became too expensive to keep building them out of stone. It was a purely economic reason. You just can't keep up that kind of labor. It just costs too much. For the first few times they did it out of stone, it was okay because labor was really, really cheap. But as things got more expensive, you couldn't do that anymore. And eventually the pyramid went out of style completely for that reason, just out of pure economics. And Egypt being a barter economy, the way they shored up the inflation was by having these vassal states from which they could get tribute.
Right.
And it was that influx of goods coming in that hedged the inflation in Egypt.
All right, here's a question here. When the Egyptian Book of the Dead talks about beer and cake, is it considered as some kind of sacrament?
Beer and bread were the normal forms of offerings that were done. There's actually many offerings that could have been done, but there's a lot of bread, a lot of beer, and beer and bread are really closely related anyway.
Right, that's true.
They would make beer out of bread, out of the offering loaves. Right. So what they would often do is they would take the offering loaves, present them to the gods. The offering loaves would then be taken and turned into beer. Because they're absolutely nasty to eat otherwise.
Right. All right, so outside of Pharaoh, within the community, the Kemetic community, was there ancestral worship?
Yes, there was some ancestral worship within, say, small communities and homes. So we don't know the extent to that because not a lot of that survived. We do see some of it. There was recently a home that was excavated with a private shrine in it, presumably to an ancestral deity, but we don't know the extent of it.
Wow. Okay. Is being part of the priesthood strictly a hereditary thing, or can someone become a priest outside of that?
Oh, yes. Yes, one could become a priest outside of it. In fact, it was fairly normal for people who weren't part of a priestly line to become priests. Now, on the other hand, say becoming the high priest was generally a patrilineal thing. So if your father was high priest, you were likely to become high priest if you were the first son.
Cool. So was it a economic situation? Is that the reason why we went from pyramid to funeral to actual parchment when it comes to funeral texts, or that was just a preference?
Well, it is partially economic. The way that the like say the pyramid texts work was they were first inscribed on, say, the pyramids of the 6th dynasty. Before that, you don't see them. Like the pyramid of Unis is the first pyramid where we see pyramid texts. Which, by the way, is a horrible pyramid to go into. I don't recommend it.
Okay.
I hate pyramids so much.
Is it what?
They're stuffy. They're hot, they're smelly, and they're miserable, cramped. Really, really cramped.
Does that mean that the ancient Egyptians were like smaller people? Is that the case?
No, they weren't that. They weren't much smaller. There's some height difference because of nutrition, but we're talking about passageways that are like 3 feet tall. So you're on your hands and knees going through these things.
But is that by design to give like reverence? Like you have to bow, or is that?
No, I think it's. I don't think it's for out of reverence. It's because you weren't supposed to be in there anyway.
Okay.
It was just the minimum that they needed to get workers in and out.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So it was like a service elevator of sorts.
Yeah, like a service elevator. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. All right.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be fancy or comfortable. You're not supposed to be in those pyramids anyway.
Right, because it's not for you. It's for the
king, for the deceased king or queen.
What are some things about ancient Egypt that most people don't know, but if you said it, they'll be like, "What?" Their minds will just explode. But like, what are some interesting facts?
Oh, some interesting facts. Gee, there's so much that's interesting about it, but
Something us laymen just wouldn't know was occurring.
wow. Well, the Egyptian Empire wasn't much of an empire. It really was a hegemony. Okay, it really had a center in Egypt, and then more like these few satellite nations, and they really didn't expand beyond those satellite nations. Like, for example, Tutmosis III, at the very height of the Egyptian Empire, only went up to Kadesh on the Orontes. That was it.
Where's that at? I have no idea.
That's in Syria.
Oh, okay.
That's as far as the Egyptian Empire ever got. It wasn't an expansionist sort of empire.
Right.
So it was really a stay-at-home sort of nation.
Really? But there were pharaohs that did have, dreams of
It
empire.
never expanded, say, like Assyria or Babylon did. Okay? Assyria and Babylon really moved their border as far as they could.
Okay. All right. Here's another thing that you would hear sometimes from the conscious community when they try to critique the Bible. It's like, well, that's just written on paper. In Kemet, it was written on the walls, right? So that basically saying we can trust what's being said there. Are there any blatant lies and propaganda on the walls of ancient Kemet?
Define a lie.
All right, let's go with no. I got an example. The Battle of Kadesh.
Battle of Kadesh, yeah.
Kadesh, sorry. So against the Hittites, right? So
yes.
that was a standstill. That was a draw.
It was a draw,
and there's an actual peace treaty, right?
Yes.
We have a
years later, many years later.
Right. So
that was not an overnight treaty.
Right.
Yes.
So I think that Ramses talked about that. Was he part of that fight?
Yeah, the Battle of Kadesh occurred in the 5th regnal year of Ramses II.
Now, what's his take on that battle?
His take was that all his soldiers were useless.
It was just him, right?
It was just him. Him and Amun-Re.
He vanquished his foes, just him by himself.
He vanquished his foes.
Like an old kung fu film. It was him.
Fought like Mantu.
So that's definitely, of course, would be a severe embellishment, to say the least.
There was some embellishment, but again, and to be honest, too, a lot of this was put on the outer pylons for the public to see.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And in some cases, it was done to warn other nations, like one of the accounts is at Abu Simbel. Okay. That's essentially there to warn the Kushites, if you rebel, I'll do to you what I did to the Hittites. Okay. Now, at the same time, too, his pylons, which were at Thebes, would have been visible to, say, Hittite diplomats. They would have seen that. But they would have understood the political situation for what that was.
So they know it was propaganda.
They know it's propaganda.
Right. So now, does he concede to the fact that there was a treaty, or that there is no trace of that on
it was a triumphal thing, that treaty. That was a big deal. Egypt had been at war for about 50 years at that point with the Hittites. The Hittite War begins with the death of King Tut.
It begins with that.
It begins with the death of King Tut. So what happens is, when King Tut dies, there's no heir to the throne. He was the last Theban prince. There was nobody to take his place.
Wow.
So what happens is, the widow doesn't want to marry the Vizier Ai. So she sends a letter to the Hittite Empire
and asks for one of their princes, right?
Asks for one of their princes to come and marry her and become king over Egypt.
And they don't trust that, right?
They don't trust that, so Supiluliluma sends a second son, one of the minor sons, because he doesn't trust it.
Right.
In fact, he drags his feet on this. It takes him about 3 months to figure out that, hey, this is legit. But by the time he goes out there, the Egyptians are already waiting for the prince en route, and they knock him off. Horemheb goes, as a general, goes out, kills the prince. Meanwhile, Ai's at home and takes the throne. Ai and Horemheb hadn't actually come to terms with
palace intrigue. This is good.
Palace intrigue. So by the time Horemheb, it'd be a fabulous movie. By the time Horemheb comes back, he discovers, hey, he's done all the dirty work, and I shafted him. Okay.
Wow.
Now, Ai has a son who somehow never makes it to the throne. So now, when he dies 40 years later, there's another succession. But by that point, there's already war between the Hittite Empire and the Egyptians. So starting with King Ai, you have war with the Hittites. That goes on through the reigns of Ai, Horemheb, Ramses I, Seti I, and then finally Ramses II.
And Ramses II is the one that dies in his 90s, right? Is that the one that last? Okay.
Yeah, he's the one that dies in his 90s.
Wow.
He reigned 66 years.
Is that the longest reign in Kemet?
Nope. It's not the longest reign in Kemet. The longest reign, I believe, is Pepi II, who reigns 90 years.
Wow.
Comes to the throne at age 6.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing.
It's not a good thing either, because long reigns also lead to weakness in the empire.
How so?
In the kingdom. Well, the fact is that when you have a fairly regular turnover of rulers, there's new blood, new courtiers, there's fresh ideas.
Oh, okay.
So you see weakness in a kingdom that's had a long ruler for a long time.
So that's the longer the reign, the slower the innovation and progress of the place.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the more a kingdom tends to crumble.
Interesting. Wow.
Well, we're seeing this right now in England. You know, Queen Elizabeth has been on the throne for 60-something years.
Yeah,
what's the state of that royal family?
Not good. Not good at all. Because she might outlive the prince. Right? So, the prince is getting up there in age as well. So,
we saw this after the reign of Queen Victoria. Same deal.
Really? Okay. Wow. So, David, you did make mention earlier about a book that you have. This is your time to plug shamelessly.
Plug shamelessly my book, huh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What is the title and subject matter of your book, sir?
Okay, well, the book is entitled The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context, an Illustrated Journey. And it is about the Egyptian context, as the title says, of the Ark of the Covenant. How did the Ark come about? Why was the Ark used? What is its symbolism about? And it relates that 3,000-year history of Egyptian furniture and the symbolism it conveys to why the Israelites might have chosen the Ark for their own god.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
And the book, actually, I just got news this week that the book is now, the printing's done. It's in the warehouse. And ChristianBook.com is already shipping it.
Wow, nice.
So it's starting to come out early.
Now, is it strictly physical, or are there ebooks as well?
Well, thanks to your audience, they told me that it's available on Logos.
That's right. Yeah, I gotta get me the ebook. Yeah. So
my publisher never tells me anything. Your audience tells me everything I need to know.
Oh man, yeah, I definitely have some smart people here in the chat. So, but is it officially made available, or is it just they're the first ones to ship it?
Well, it's officially available now. Okay. So the fact is that Hendrickson Publishers releases the book as soon as they get it a physical copy and the physical copies in print.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So ChristianBook.com is now actually shipping it, but that's because Hendrickson and ChristianBooks.com actually share the same warehouse. I didn't know that either.
Okay.
So
they just keep you in the dark most of the time, then.
I'm just the author. They don't tell me anything.
Right. Yeah, I definitely want to get that, and then once I read it, I definitely want you to come back so we could talk about the actual book.
Okay. Yeah.
I could give you my corrections that you need.
Oh, of course, yes, definitely. I'll value those corrections.
Of course. But before we get out of here, is there anything you would like to share with our audience before we wrap things up?
I have a YouTube channel as well. Ancient Egypt and the Bible, and I take people's questions on there, and I do full-length shows on their specific questions.
Nice.
So I would encourage people to subscribe.
Put the link in the chat so people can subscribe.
Okay.
All right. So I will take one more. Oh, okay. Here's a question from Mr. Phil Fox. Can you say the name of the book again, sir?
It is The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context, an illustrated journey.
Nice. That means there's pictures.
Pictures. Yeah, there's 100 pictures in there.
Nice.
I did my own photographs for that.
Now, is it like legally? Is it hard for you to be able to, unless I guess it's easier when you take your own photographs.
It's much easier when I take my own. Publishers like when authors do their own photographs because there's no extra rights that they have to buy. So it's less legal paperwork. It's less money for them. It's also a lot more street cred too, because you can actually prove you've been there.
True. That is true.
But the downside is not a lot of authors are good photographers. It's its own skill set.
So how are you behind the lens, my friend?
I'm very good behind the lens. If I do say so myself.
Such a humble Egyptologist.
Oh, absolutely.
Like about you, David. Good stuff.
I took 6 months to teach myself how to do professional travel level photography.
Nice.
So I actually had that time to actually really own the craft.
Nice. That's beautiful. That would be a good episode. How does one, take photographs of these ancient, relics and artifacts? That's a good video for you right there.
Well, the most challenging thing is actually taking photos in museums. That's really difficult. The relics, the landscapes, the temples, the tombs, they're usually pretty easy unless you're in a really dark chapel. But museums are the challenge because the light's low. You can't use a tripod. You have all these challenges of crowds and people.
Right.
Museums are the most difficult challenge that any archaeological photographer faces.
Wow, cool. Because you could do a hybrid. Because I know there's
flash. They hate flashes for some reason.
Too much attention, I guess. I don't know.
Well, these artifacts have been baking out in the sun for 3,000 years, but they don't want you to use a flash.
That's true. It's very sensitive stuff. But that would make for a great video. Because I know there's a lot of camera enthusiasts and historian enthusiasts. So you could be like a hybrid, So
I think I've already done one video on photography already for on the channel. So there's one already there.
Cool. That's good, man. So but definitely like, share, and subscribe David's channel. Again, I had a great time. This was fun.
I did too. It was a lot of fun.
I'll be tapping your shoulder again, you know.
It would be my pleasure to do it again. I had a great time.
So with that being said, David Falk, BK Apologist, signing off. Peace.
Thank you for having me.